There are 26 playable races in World of Warcraft, and yet over a quarter of the player base chooses to play as either a Night Elf or a Blood Elf. But why, in this diverse world of everything from orcs, trolls, wolfmen, and diaper gremlins? Do people mainly opt to play the pretty elf people? Why not one of the other 24 races in the game? Today, let's explore the most unpopular WoW races and why more players aren't picking them. But first, some breaking news. Mr. Scoots has been kidnapped and is in immediate danger of being hurled into an active volcano. Please subscribe, or else my hands might slip. Pandaren are the most unpopular non-allied race. In order to understand why this is, I want to talk about the Mists of Pandaria, a very controversial expansion for World of Warcraft. On one hand, a lot of players hold the class design of Mists as some of the best in the game's history, but on the other, a lot of players didn't get to enjoy it as they didn't want to slog through the daily quest apocalypse that had begun to rear its ugly head at around this time of the game's lifespan. Some players loved the flavor of the expansion, and others felt that it was out of place. Similarly to the divide amongst the players in regards to their views of the expansion, the race of Pandaren felt their own divide in opposing views and philosophy. As World of Warcraft's first playable neutral race, the Pandaren are given the choice between two differing philosophies, and more importantly, the choice between two different factions. At the time, the WoW Horde and Alliance conflict was at its peak, meaning the choice would ultimately pit former friends and lovers against one another as mortal enemies. This was a first for World of Warcraft, and was met with every bit of intrigue and skepticism as the rest of the expansion from players of differing opinions. But I think the most divisive part about the expansion and its brand new playable race was not the story, not the dailies, not the neutrality of the new race, but rather the Pandaren themselves. While I like them and more than understand why many don't, or why some might be hesitant to play them as they are an animalistic race that is visually a lot more docile and cute looking compared to something like Tauren or Worgen, I think their initial reception was mixed partly because a lot of people think that Blizzard pulled the expansion's lore out of a hat. And while that's not an entirely unfair argument to make, it also isn't entirely accurate either. The truth is more morally gray, let's say, than black and white.
Okay, 3, 2, 1, let's jam.
Pandaren were originally made by the Blizzard senior art director because of his family nickname, the Panda. To celebrate the birth of his daughter, he created this artwork, which because of some unnamed webmaster, would go on to be an official Blizzard wallpaper, which garnered a very warm reception from fans. This would lead to Blizzard to teasing the Pandaren as a playable race in Warcraft 3 Reign of Chaos as part of an April Fool's joke on their website. But when the reception to this was only cold when fans found out it wasn't real, their inclusion in the Warcraft universe became inevitable. Pandaren would go on to be featured in everything from small Easter eggs to in missions as playable Brewmaster heroes. They were even used to cover up scaled-down images on warglaives that had accidentally resembled a certain, let's just say, symbol that was used by a historical figure in the past. A bad one, let's say. Yes, this is real. Pandaren were originally planned to be released as the Alliance playable race in TBC, the very first World of Warcraft expansion. They were scrapped at some point in development because the Chinese government told Blizzard that they wouldn't allow World of Warcraft to be playable in China if they used pandas in their game, as pandas are seen as a national treasure there. As a direct result of this cut, when BlizzCon 2005 came around, only the Blood Elves were ready to be shown to the public, and no reveal or even mention of an Alliance playable race was made at the convention, as the replacement of the Pandaren, the Draenei, were not ready in time. This led to speculation about what the Alliance race could be, with the Pandaren being among the candidates theorized by fans. It would be years, however, before Blizzard would be able to successfully negotiate with the Chinese government for the inclusion of a panda people in their game. So no, the Pandaren weren't just randomly thrown out there because the art team got drunk one night. But not a lot of people know about any of this really, and even fewer know the whole story. But I bet some of you were in the same boat as me, only vaguely knowing about some April Fool's Day joke thing, but please let me know if the rest of this was news to you or if I live under a rock. Nevertheless, the player reception of the sudden panda jump scare was a widespread one. But even with the lore implications aside, I think visually and thematically the biggest reason most people didn't pick up the Pandaren as well, they're just kind of goofy. I mean, look at this fella. They are and always were very cartoony, with Pandaren and monk animations in general being very highly praised at the time, but a lot of players got into WoW for the traditional high fantasy classes and races. So no matter how well done I think they are, they're still not the traditional high fantasy characters that most think of when they think the world of Warcraft. I think this still holds them down to this very day. I mentioned the popularity of elves earlier, so it comes as no surprise that Blizzard thought it would be wise to create more of these pretty elf people for us to enjoy. The Battle for Azeroth expansion introduced the concept of allied races, which are for the most part just variants of other playable races. Due to the popularity of the Horde's Blood Elves, the Alliance were given their own variant in the form of the Void Elves, which are actually now quite popular. On the flip side, the Horde were given their own variant of the Alliance's iconic Night Elves, in the form of the Nightborne. I was surprised to learn, however, that the Nightborne aren't nearly as popular as the other brand of purple elves, despite the previously mentioned immense popularity of Night Elves. And I believe the reason for this is that the Void Elves had nothing to live up to other than being a purple version of the Blood Elves, since outside of Illyria, there really were no Void Elves in the lore until Umbric and the other Void magic users were introduced for the express purpose of justifying the race's inclusion in the game. The Nightborne, on the other hand, were an already established race in the Legion expansion, and had an entire zone with countless characters that we had already met by this point. Furthermore, the models of these very pompous elves had already been seen, but when the playable version was added, players noticed the major differences between the Nightborne we had met and the Nightborne we got to play as, which I'll admit is quite jarring. Some people point out how the Nightborne are just Night Elves with purple, and while that's a fair point, I don't think that in itself is enough to make them not see play, as the Void Elves are arguably just Blood Elves but purple. I think the main difference between them is that there was no hype or pre-established expectations to live up to with these guys, whereas the Nightborne were seen as a downgrade of what could have been. As this Redditor pointed out, I think the Nightborne disdain comes from the fact that they don't look nearly as cool as the NPC versions. Instead, we are left with a slightly more purple and magical Night Elf. Now, enough of these newer playable races with their gimmicks. Let's talk about a real man's character race. A classic WoW race. One that was there for the slaying of Ragnaros, for the hatching of the brood of Onyxia. A WoW race which strikes fear into the hearts of all who hear its name. The Gnomes. For this segment, I want to read the tragic tale of the level 19 Gnome Warrior. This is my favorite forum post I've ever seen. He's level 19. He made this post about leveling up from like level 15 to 35. I don't think he ever really finished. I think being a gnome and getting bullied for being a gnome was too much for him. All right, let's see what he had to say though, okay? He said, when people said everybody hates gnome, I thought it was a joke, and I made this gnome warrior. It was fine until level 15, just questing and stuff, but from 15 to 35, I've been tanking the dungeons, and it was terrible. The first dungeon, Raging Fire Chasm, I had 2 DPS who constantly moved the mobs before me, and on my second dungeon, Stockade, the Dwarf Paladin healer didn't want to heal me. He was attacking the mobs as DPS, and I had to ask him to heal me. I died many times because the healer dwarf didn't want to heal me. I did nothing wrong. I didn't say anything wrong. Anyway, we got it done finally, and despite of everything, I said thank you. And this dwarf paladin healer just said, LOL. What does it mean? LOL. I've never seen that as a response to a thank you. At Shadowfang Keep, it was a priest healer who wanted to lead the group by attacking the mobs first. I joined the group and was talking to the NPC to get the quest, but I found the priest attacking the mob, so I hurried to the scene to save the group. I thought it was just a one-time thing, but for the entire run she did this. I was patient and we got 3 bosses down just before attacking the last boss at Shadowfang Keep. While we were waiting for the NPC to open the door, the group just kicked me out. Why does everyone hate Gnome? I thought it was just Horde, but Alliance players hating the Gnomes really hurt me. You know, someday I'd just like to have a garden so I could have a couple of human statues. And I guess he really didn't like playing a gnome, so he re-rolled or quit. So that sucks. In any case, gnomes are the least popular race in terms of all races that were shipped with the game, so the original 8. But they got a second chance at the gnomes in the Battle for Azeroth expansion. So let's see what the fuck is that? Why do they have no customization options? Why aren't they diaper trained? Why does the Blingtron 9000 have more aura than these Mechagnomes? I think I would have genuinely preferred leper gnomes with their skin peeling off than these diaper wearing, oil drinking, disgusting ass clankers. If an EMP goes off, these are just torso gnomes. They don't have any arms or legs. What if Zalteth pulls up to the end boss of Midnight with a magnet? What then, Mechagnomes? What then? Perhaps their vulnerability to magnets is what makes them the least popular Alliance-only allied race. And least popular Alliance race across the board. As if being a gnome couldn't be any harder. You have these guys just putting the cherry on top of the shit sandwich that is the poor gnome struggle. Listen, if you're a gnome, please leave a comment and tell me why you put up with the struggles of being a gnome. Because honestly, I think gnomes are all right. I mean, I think Chromie, who uses a gnome visage, is pretty cool. You know, I don't hate gnomes. I think they're fine. Would I play one? Let's go to the next character. Race. Yeah, let's go. Now, the least popular horde-only allied race, and horde race in general, are the Highmountain Tauren. Now, this is strange because Tauren are actually among the most popular races in the game. So why not the Highmountain there with them? In my opinion, it comes down to the fact that if you're playing a Tauren for a long time, and I'm sure some of you watching have been, there's little reason to make the switch from the original to the newer version. Void Elves, for instance, give the most popular player models to the faction which previously didn't have access to them. Other allied races have deep ties to the lore, dating back to the original Warcraft games, even with justifications made in the lore as to why we're allowed to play them now. And a few have enough differences in aesthetic or flavor that they are sometimes able to attract an audience. And then there are these guys, with their moose antlers. With lore that barely ties them to the Horde, doesn't carry the same nostalgia or long history as the original, so is there really an incentive to spend the money to switch to one? Or to spend the time leveling one? And since they're locked to newer players joining the game, you're really just not as likely to see these fellows running around, are you? Not when you have Mr. 100% ground beef over here. I mean, my goodness, look at that fella. Are you going to doubt him? Are you going to question his lack of moose antlers? I don't think so. Now, unlike with the Mechagnomes, these guys aren't really ugly or sorely lacking customization, but instead I think their issues stem more from being underwhelming rather than being, Mechagnomes. Lastly, I want to cover the absolute least popular race overall, other than the Haranir, who are new so we don't have any conclusive stats for them for a while, which I cannot say for the Earthen. The least popular WoW race has been around since September of 2024, and while I think that's still relatively new, only being from an expansion ago, combining their overall stats with the ones we have for current max level characters paints sort of a grim early picture for these neutral dwarves. I could be wrong, and if I am, I'll make a follow-up video in a few months about the wild comeback of the third dwarven race, but unfortunately, I just don't see that happening. But where did we go wrong here? I mean, aren't there 4, arguably 5 different races of elves at this point? I mean, surely a third dwarf race is okay, right? Well, in my opinion, the unfortunate truth is that we can't all share the pretty elf privilege. It's not like the Void Elves got a warm reception upon their unveiling either. But it does kind of end up being true that the Void Elves, like the Blood Elves, look conventionally pleasing while still not leaning too far into any one kind of fantasy. While the Void Elves can be all blue and emo, they still have the customization to look almost exactly like Blood Elves, who themselves exist in this space where they're close enough to humans to be relatable and to look good in a variety of different transmogs and themes, but just fantasy enough to not be boring for the majority of players. Now, dwarves, on the other hand, I believe fulfill a much more niche fantasy than that of being a, well, okay, let's be real, being a hot person. And while I think the Earthen have some pretty neat lore, I think every time Blizzard has announced the 3rd or 4th reskin of an existing race, it has been met with skepticism and typically a lot harder for the average player to get excited about. They also lose out on the very powerful nostalgia buff that a lot of these classic races have going for them. You might play a dwarf because you played one in vanilla, BC or Wrath. You might have thought this fella, the dwarf with the bear, was the coolest shit ever back in the day, and you picked him because he reminds you of your hairy, drunken self. You might have re-rolled Dark Iron because you've always thought they were badass, and because you wished from the very get-go that Blizzard would let you play one. I mean, they are one of the most requested races in this game. And that right there, while more niche, is still a nostalgia-boosted reason to pick one. What memories do the Earthen elicit? When I think of Crystalline Dwarf, it brings up old, let's say, wounds. And again, even if you think the Earthen are the coolest thing ever, they are a 3rd reskin of an existing playable race. I already went over the reasons why I believe the Hot Topic Elves pulled ahead despite the same folly. But unfortunately, I don't believe the Earthen have any of the same benefits going for them. Do I think it's cool that the females can have facial hair? Yeah, I actually do, but I think that's more of a niche appeal for them. Despite some relatively cool customization options, the fact is, the average Joe isn't going to get as excited about a hairy dwarf as they are about the 3rd version of the Booby Gatina. Okay? I'm just being real here. You can hate me for saying that, but I think it's just the Yogg-forsaken truth. I'm not saying I don't think the Earthen are cool, or that I'm not happy that certain Horde players who finally wanted to make a dwarf can, but what I am saying is that you put the average player on a character customization screen, they're gonna pick something that looks good to them. And a lot more people are going to sway towards this than this. That's just reality. I'm sorry. Please don't hate me. I also think there were some missed opportunities with these guys. Like, yes, they have some very cool customization with them, but once you mog them up, put some clothes on them, unless you go the naked dwarf route, you're just going to end up looking like any other dwarf, just maybe a bit bigger. The option for hairy females, what I think is cool, is just something that normal default dwarves should have been able to do from a long time ago. I don't think hair or what is this, wire, even looks all that good on any earthen, regardless of body type that you choose. I don't think it looks nearly crystally enough, and I think, as a matter of fact, most of the cool customization is for their bodies and doesn't affect their head outside of some new colors and shiny hair or a wire stuff. So again, you put some clothes on them, you're gonna cover up a lot of the cool stuff that you would otherwise be looking at, which severely limits transmog options. Like, for all I know, when I look at this guy right here, this is just the result of late night drinking. Maybe this is just a normal dwarf who needs a skin care routine and some dry hair shampoo. It just looks kind of weird. I mean, they are admittedly similar to the Dark Irons and have some strange racial abilities which might be a turnoff for some people, but are def appreciated in terms of flavor and sometimes gameplay perspective from some. But the fact is that a good portion of the reception has been, ew, the races are so weird, the wire hair is so weird, another dwarf race. And it probably just makes a lot of players look at that, look at what people are saying, and want to look the other way. I mean, we live in the social media age. People's reception and attitude towards things matters a lot. And if you're not just a surface level player who's jumping in and creating a character, not even looking at the internet, again, you're gonna go for Booby Gatino III. It sucks, but it's the truth. And this video is about what makes these races unpopular, not what makes me dislike them personally. That would be an entirely separate video. And I don't know if it's a very good idea for me to make a video about my least favorite races. I don't know, that just looks, this is already edging territory, okay? It's also just jarring to think about when I've been eating food after every single raid wipe for eons now, to think of eating minerals instead. Like, I don't know, it's just not ingrained in my head the same way that eating the funny food buff is. I don't really want to eat a rock. That doesn't appeal to me, at least now. Maybe when I was a child, you tell me, oh, you can eat this rock. I'd be like, oh, hell yeah. But I wasn't eating rocks as a kid, by the way. I feel like that's worth mentioning. Anyway, and I think especially if you take away none of the other things, we got to read this forum post right here, which is the target demographic for the Dwarven player base. Okay, so what they have to say is a concern for Dwarven players. Okay, let's read this, shall we? We have, how do earthen drink / get drunk? Like they are rocks with gems and copper. I'm drunk right now, but I'm kind of curious how a rock can get drunk. I also want to know if they'd have Vrykul people there who'd drink, but that's a second thought. Like, yes, they make mead, but does elements affect them weirdly? You see, how do the dwarves get drunk? The metal dwarves. That's a good question. I mean, I really don't know. This person says, I imagine it messes with their circuitry. This person says, that's a good thought. And maybe they are acting weirdly than robots. I don't know what that means, but maybe that's a special Pandaren crystal gem ale from this level 80 Pandaren warrior. Feel free to suggest future video topics in the comments below and subscribe to not miss them. Also, to potentially save Mr. Scoots, you know, before it's too late. Anyway, thank you. Goodbye.